I want to thank you for joining us for another lesson in the Written for Our Learning series of studies. In this series, we're looking at Old Testament passages, sometimes as they relate to the New, but also lessons that we can just simply learn from. And in this case, we want to learn it in a contrast, a comparison of characters. The title is Contrasting Character, and there's also a question that I'd like us to consider, and that is, what's the difference, or what made the difference between the two? We want to compare what is said about Jehoram and what is said about Job. So let's look first of all at Jehoram. 2 Chronicles chapter 21:20 is where we find the verse that I want to consider in this series. As we look at Jehoram, we know that he was the son of Jehoshaphat, who was king of Judah. And later in that context, we see that he killed all of his brothers with a sword. It's also said of him that he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel. And there we know that that referred to idolatry and their departure from God and his will. Remember the two shrines that were built at Dan and Bethel and the golden calves placed within those after the United Kingdom divided. We see all of those kings of Israel being being wicked kings, evil kings, not a good one among them. And we see the kings of Judah having some good and some bad. And here with Jehoram, we see one bad. Another phrase that characterized him was that he led Judah astray. Powerful language, much more we could say. But you're looking at leadership that was wrong, leadership that was misguided and misdirected in the way that they would take the people. Eventually, Elijah, the prophet, wrote him a letter. And in that letter, he indicated a horrible end for the family of Jehoram, and especially for Jehoram himself. And without getting into too much detail, we see that it was going to be an intestinal problem, an intestinal illness with which he was going to be plagued because of the character and the actions that he manifested on this occasion. We read further that after 2 years of suffering with that intestinal disease, he finally died. But here's the phrase I want us to focus on in 2 Chronicles chapter 21, verse 20, where the text says he died to no one's sorrow. In other words, no one grieved, no one cared, no one regretted the king's passing away. At his death, he was buried in the city of David, but he was not buried in the tombs of the kings, showing again what the people thought of that situation, thought of him, a horrible leader, a horrible man, a horrible example. How sad that we see the commentary that when he died, no one cared, no one grieved, no one suffered. But then I want to contrast Job. And there I want us to look to Job chapter 1, verses 6 through 8. As we look there in chapter 1, we see that Job was indeed a wealthy man. We see that he was married. He had 10 children. The text also indicates that he was indeed a wealthy farmer, rancher, if you will. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys. In that day, in that culture, he would be considered to be a very wealthy man. And he was held in esteem, if for nothing else, than his wealth. Because the text indicates he was the greatest of all the people of the East. Now, that was stated before the passage I want us to look at. That was stated immediately following the description of his possessions, his prominence in society in the East because of that wealth. But that's not the comparison I want us to make. The comparison that I want us to make is found in verses 6 through 8, and that's in the context of a discussion that God has with Satan. And he introduces Job to Satan. with the question, have you considered my servant Job? What a way to be remembered. What a way to be recognized, a servant of God. Further says, there is none like him on the earth. He's blameless and upright. He fears God and he shuns evil. What a great Christian man in contrast to a pagan-leaning king, Jehoram. A king who would slaughter his own family. A king for whom no one grieved. But can you imagine God introducing you to someone? Have you considered my servant Pat or whoever? Have you considered my servant Job? When you look at that situation, we see a lesson that we can draw from this, and here's where we'll spend our last minute or two. And that is, greatness is not found where many people attempt to find it. We look at a lot of people that revere the 1%, the wealthiest of our society. Look at professional athletes and the platform they have to say the things that they want to say. People want to be like them. When I went to Ukraine on one of my first trips, I saw the girls there that had the maroon streaks and dye in their hair, and that was when that first became popular. And the idea was that Britney Spears had great influence over there. Whatever she wore, whatever she did to her hair, whatever she did to her makeup, that's what people want to do. They considered her to be great in her field. But as we look at this contrast, greatness is not found in position or status or wealth. We look at the king, Jehoram, who had a high position. He had high status as it related to ruling the people. He was a man who would have the wealth of the nation, but that didn't make him great. Job was introduced to us as a man of great possessions. He was the greatest of all the people in the East. But again, that wasn't why he was great as it relates to the point we're trying to make here. Greatness is seen in service. Greatness is seen in faithfulness to the Lord. I'm not saying that we should seek greatness. I'm not saying that we should climb a social ladder. And we shouldn't try to be seen as the greatest in the kingdom. But we should be remembered for our greatness. And what a concept that is. What a commendation that is on a life of faithfulness. For someone to say he died as a servant of God. Thank you again for joining us on Written for Our Learning. We'll see you next time. And until then, God bless you.